IVM.
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine. What would you be doing today had it not been for your day-to-day responsibilities of meeting work deadlines and making sure your family is financially secured? Would you have been a footballer, kicking the ball around on those grassy grounds? Or would you have been an artist, sitting near a window overlooking the hills as you paint away? Maybe you crave to be a photographer. But here you are, framing a picture of the life you wish you had. But this can still be a reality. करो पूरे अपने इरादे, अपनों से किए सभी वादे. SBI Life अपने लिए, अपनों के लिए. To know more about our insurance plans with wealth creation, log on to www.sbilife.co.in. IRDAI registration number 111.
In Malayalam, there's always that culture of, going ahead and making our experimental movies, writers coming into movies and writers getting paid a lot of money. So budget for little experimental movies, even if it's very small. And it's like most producers can handle like one flop. It's not like a Tamil movie where the budget itself is so big that if you have one flop, you're like knocked out, So even risk-wise, it's a little less. And there's generally a history of all kinds of movies working in Kerala. So fundamentally, that money becomes a little less complicated.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast. What is the gold standard when it comes to cinema in India? Which industry is home to some of the most progressive scripts that make it to the screen? Who produce the most innovative original content during the lockdown? Who's really pushing the envelope when it comes to their craft, whether it's acting or writing? The answer to many of these questions in India today is often Malayalam cinema. And it has been so for many years now. In fact, what is happening right now is merely the new wave or its resurgence back to its best. Only bigger and better than it ever was. I wanted to talk about this phenomenon with Vishal Menon, Film Companion's resident expert on all things Malayalam. Vishal famously dropped out from law school to pursue his passion, which is writing about cinema. I've been a fan of Vishal's analysis and critique for years, and I wanted to ask him to break down this phenomenon called Malayalam cinema for us and why it works. I also wanted to talk to him about how this industry is a bundle of contradictions. For a region that brings out some of the most progressive scripts in India, the glass ceiling for women creators seems extraordinarily thick there. For an industry that has the most approachable and lovable of stars, it still stinks of patriarchy. And for a region that is built on the fundamentals of socialism, at least politically, nepotism seems not only to be omnipresent, but also strangely seems to work and is even welcome by others. I wanted to talk to Vishal about all of this as he's probably the best person to delve into these contradictions. And I also wanted to quiz him on his absolute favorites from the past decade. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Coffee podcast.
Hello. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Advertising is Dead, Varun is joined by Anupam Gurani, the Chief Marketing Officer for LEAD. He breaks down the school edtech sector for us. On The Longest Constitution, Priya delves into intellectual property rights and the sexual reproductive autonomy of women. On Press Decode, Sarah Vagda and Prafulla engage in a debate on representation and discuss how we see race and religion. On Say No to Drama, Chitna slices through the drama around fights in relationships and how long they should last. Is it immoral to have feelings for someone else after you're happily married? On Hans Vani, hear the story, Tasavvur-e-Jana, about a woman's dilemma with love. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. It really helps us. Don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms that you're listening to. And also remember, you can check us out on YouTube at www.ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance, Bank of Baroda, and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast, Vishal. Where are you talking to us from and how are you doing?
Hi, Karthik. I'm doing fine. How are you doing? I'm talking to you from Chennai. I hope everybody's safe and wearing their masks.
Yeah, no, Vishal, Delhi it's actually fantastic weather as we speak. It's winter blending into summer with an occasional show of spring. So if I have to describe it in one phrase, it is picnic weather, which is unheard of when I was growing in Chennai. Picnic used to be like after the sunset in Chennai, like when you go to the beach or something like that. So yeah, all good in Delhi. Vishal, I'm a huge fan of Film Companion, and especially your stream. In that, I love your take on South Indian cinema, especially Malayalam cinema. I want to start off briefly with your own journey into cinema. I read somewhere that you were pursuing law, and then you left it to get into what you're doing right now. Talk to us a little bit about your younger years growing up and how you got into film as an industry.
So I'm South Indian, right? So like the pressure to study and pursue a professional degree and stuff like that. So I was pursuing law in Delhi in Faculty of Law in Delhi University. So I was always interested in movies. I was always like the only kid at home, both parents working. So I was raised more by movies than my parents. So movies was always like a big deal, but then it is so impossible, right? Like if you're a South Indian in a South Indian family, like movies are more impossible than if you are from a really small place in UP or Bihar to get to Bombay and get into movies, because it's impossible. So that's how movies were for me. But then while I was pursuing law, and when I kind of realized that the course wasn't working for me, like law is not going to be something that I would be happy to be doing for the rest of my life, I just had to kind of switch careers. And this is my in between, like it's in movies but it's not in movies, so it's like a nice happy middle place. So that's how, I've been doing it for about 8-9 years now, and I seem to be like, happy here, so.
I absolutely love what you said about I was brought up more by cinema than by parents. I think that's true for me as well, in many ways. But was the dream to always like appreciate cinema? Was the dream is also at some level to make cinema?
Never really to make cinema, but write about or write cinema. It was always in between. So I used to enjoy talking or writing about movies rather than the thought of actually writing movies, but then always something to do with writing. Not so much direction, camera, nothing. I've not even thought about all that, but always something to do with ideas and, discussing things in movies, discussing ideas. So even when my reviews, even when I'm talking about movies, my strongest point I feel is the writing part of movies. It's not really in understanding the beauty of a long take or a close up or things like that. It's more to do with, okay, why did they do this? Why did they do that? Or what is the problem of doing something like this? So it's always, it comes from the base of writing. And even when I'm writing a profile, the logic that I kind of applied to writing that profile is exactly the beats of a proper masala mainstream movie. You start with a punch, like a dramatic punch, and then a couple of paragraphs about the details, like the reason why this particular story or this particular person is so strange or unique. And then you end it in the middle with a really high point, so that you can come back to a couple of paragraphs about details again, and then you finally end at a really personal, emotional high. So it's exactly like every beat comes from the beat of a mainstream masala movie for me. Everything, even if I were to write a speech at a wedding, it would still follow that format.
I love that. I love you. I can almost imagine you going into a 3-act structure on your wedding speech. Sort of that. But growing up, what is the cinema that inspired you? What did you love watching and leaving the theater saying, "Wow, that is what cinema should be"?
See, it's literally like I told you, like I would come back home, the keys would be under the mat and the house is empty for me. I would reach home by about 2:30. At exactly 2 o'clock on Asianet, a Malayalam channel called Asianet, the movie would start playing, the afternoon movie. And this would be like random, okay? The movies from the 80s, like when Kamal Haasan was acting in Malayalam, it would be those kind of movies. It would be the old Mammootty, Rahman movies, the initial Mohanlal movies. So I started with that. So I have to watch the 2 o'clock show, but exactly after 20 or 30 minutes after the movie starts. So my day begins with that. When I come back home, school, of course, doesn't matter. I'm saying the second I get back home. So the movie would be that. And then, of course, around 7:30, 8 at night, I'd start watching whatever's playing at night also on Surya TV and, all the other Malayalam channels. So I was always obsessed with Malayalam movies. later I got into, Hindi cinema. Hindi and Malayalam cinema was always a big part of growing up. Tamil and English came much later. And then, of course, when you get your own pocket money and all that, it is always to go watch movies in the theaters by myself. And I'm one of those early Malayalis who got converted to Tamil cinema, like, not during the Subramaniapuram phase, even earlier. So that's how it's been, like a mix of the four languages that I grew up with.
That's amazing. Let's talk about Malayalam and Tamil cinema. Any particular movies that inspired you growing up? Anything that you remember saying this was a game changer for me?
Many, like for instance, maybe the idea of getting into movies, as in, okay, this is not just like pastime, right? It's more than pastime. I'm thinking too deeply about all this, like what's happening. There were lots of movies in the early 2000s, even though it's not really considered a great time for Malayalam cinema per se, but then you're seeing the craze, right? Like a lot of the Mohanlal movies of that period, especially the super mass masala movies that came at that time. It was a rage, like the kind of effect that if you don't watch that movie by Friday and Saturday, on Monday you have nothing to talk about in school. Like you will feel left out. You will feel like everybody's already watched those movies and you have nothing to talk about. So at that time, it started with a lot of those Mohanlal Mammootty movies in the start of 2000s. Then you kind of go back and watch movies for the screenplay. It's not just entertainment because you've already seen those movies. Then you there are movies like Taniyavartanam and all that, so Mammootty movies that you kind of watch, and it's just like it affects you so much, right? Like it's not just a regular movie. You're thinking about that movie, you're crying in the end, you're afraid it'll happen to you. All that happens, and then it all kind of culminates into not just watching movies from a distance, but also really getting into it. Those people are not like fictional. They're people that they're people actually, like even for you, I'm sure, like apart from your close circle of family and friends, you would have actually seen so many actors more than you would have seen like an uncle or an aunt, things like that, right? So these characters really become like that, and all your experiences are actually other people's experiences from movies. It's not like you've really experienced much yourself, right? So that starts happening after a point. So I can't name like even 5 films because like literally hundreds of movies that are coming to my mind when you ask me this, but it's that perfect age, like when you're 10 to 13 and 14, it's just movie after movie after movie. So that's how it kind of changed everything.
That's fascinating. For me, if I look at Malayalam cinema, right, and I think Malayalam cinema as well as Tamil cinema probably have different eras, especially in the last 20 years. It's possible to even look at it as 3 different phases, right? Like for example, you mentioned Subramaniapuram at some point, right? I think for me, in the late 90s or early 2000s, there were a few films that really changed the trajectory of Tamil cinema. For example, there was a film called Kadal Kotte, and that sort of changed the way Tamil cinema was written and appreciated, right? And then you had a slew of films which was about relationships and love and everything else in a very, very progressive sort of a way. And then, of course, Subramaniapuram happened, and that was again completely different era. In fact, I would be remiss if I don't mention Bala's Setu in it. So Setu, yeah. Subramaniapuram, all of them sort of around the same 4-5 year period sort of happened, and that probably changed Tamil cinema forever, like in an unrecognizable manner. And then, of course, the new phase, that is happening over the last 4-5 years. But with you, if you look at Malayalam cinema, how would you look at the last, say, 10 years or so? Because for me, if I were to again do a same sort of a segmentation of Malayalam cinema, it's difficult to obviously put a finger on it. But I feel somewhere something changed with probably Bangalore days. And again, I'm not attributing it to one film. Like, this is not one moment or anything like that. But then, early 2000s, like you said, I wasn't a great fan of Malayalam cinema at that point. I was before that. And then sort of something changed at that point, right? When that happened. And I think the last 10 years or so has been like phenomenal, right? For Malayalam cinema. You'll know this better than anybody else. What do you attribute this new wave of Malayalam cinema to?
See, I'll go like Bangalore Days is a very important movie, but then Bangalore Days is a movie which I feel is important for taking Malayalam cinema outside Kerala. So Bangalore Days, I think, is 2013, but even maybe 3 years before that, 2010 onwards, there's a movie called Traffic, I think from around 2009, 10 onwards, that kind of movement completely shifted. So these directors and writers were like a lot of the great directors and writers. They were also there in the 2000s, but then it was an in-between kind of a phase because the kind of directors who changed Malayalam cinema, they started their movies around 2005, 2006, but then for whatever reason, they still had to make movies with Mammootty Mohanlal. Now, no offense to any of them, they're both great actors, but I'm just talking about the market, the business, right? So even if they're the best directors in the world, if they have to make Mammootty Mohanlal movies, there's a limitation, right? They have to kind of go through a channel, they have to make a certain kind of a movie. So the movies were stylish and different and new, but then eventually it's a Mammootty Mohanlal movie. It cannot completely reinvent the wheel when you have two mega stars as your stars. And because that's literally the only thing that was working in the 2000s. The only other star really was Dilip. And Prithviraj, he was just coming up. He would have to do 4 or 5 bad movies to get one good movie. So Prithviraj is just still too new. So that is a time when all the new directors, all the big directors, are like the guy who produced Bangalore Days, for instance. He was making the massiest of mass movies in the 2000s. But he had to make those movies because that's what he has to make: a Mohanlal movie, a Mammootty movie, then another Mammootty movie, and another Mammootty movie. That's what he did in the 2000s.
You're talking about Anwar Rashid.
Anwar Rashid, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the second that kind of changed by around 2010 onwards, when these directors, they all come together, then there was another set of technicians and craftsmen to kind of help them, and they also developed their own stars. So this is also the time when Fahad came up, and Dulquer started doing his movies. Nivin came, So these three, it's like they made their own stars, and they kind of made their own ecosystem. Then it's like, okay, you can't even imagine in the 2000s there would have never been a movie called 24 North Kadam. It's just if it had come, it would have run its course in the festival circuit and it would have just been forgotten. But to really make a movie about an eccentric guy with OCD traveling from one end of Kerala to the other end of Kerala on a hartar, it's just not a movie that would have worked in the 2000s. So the ecosystem was slowly developing. And by the start of 2010, it's like, okay, there are these 3 stars, there are these 4 or 5 music directors, there are these 5, 6 stars cinematographers. Everything just came into place at that time. And then it's only a matter of time. And it's literally like how I kind of see it is there's this whole Anwar Rashid group, which, I mean, I think to some extent even Dulquer and, Fahad kind of falls into that. Anwar Rashid, Amal Neerad, Rajiv Ravi, that's one group. And that's an equally big group on the side that's by Vineet Srinivasan. Vineet Srinivasan, all the Nitin Pauly movies, love action drama, so many, Helen, all that is one section. So it's like you've got the light, feel good, nice, happy family section going on here, and the hardcore, the Malayalam cinema that travels outside Kerala, both happening simultaneously. Of course, Premam is, I mean, I don't have to tell you anything about Premam, right? So it just started in 2010, where the ecosystem was in place and it is proper. And it's a proper generational shift, right? You see a movie like Hridayam, everybody's son or daughter. So it's just another total generational shift that just started from 2010, and it's like still going strong even today.
For me, every revolution in any industry is by a few protagonists, right? Forget cinema, for example. You take Indian cricket for that matter, right? There was the whole Dada phase, and then what then Dhoni took over, and then there was a Virat phase later on, right? To me, I think when you look at the protagonists of Malayalam cinema, right? Whether it is a Rajiv or a Fafa or a Dulquer or Mahesh, all of them. It's what we refer to across many industries globally as a new wave, right? But what essentially are they doing different from what was before, say in the early 2000s, etc.? What is the change at a on ground level, according to you?
There are also theory this, for instance, like fundamentally, if there is film to digital, right, a lot of that will move into the filmmaking techniques as well. So the old guard, the directors like Shaji Kailas, Satyan Adhikar, and all those people, when they're still making movies in film, whereas a new generation of people who think in digital, right, as in there's no hurry. Like you can shoot Premam, I think they shot for 90 days or something. Shooting for 90 days is impossible, right? Impossible to shoot for 90 days with film. So when you're shooting for 90 days and when it's being directed by an editor, like Alphonse is an editor, so he's thinking in editing. So the kind of in between moments, the kind of nothingness that you can shoot and write is very different. Everything doesn't have to be written, and everything doesn't have to be seen 63 morning to evening. Let's shoot that. It's not like that. In fact, Dilish Pothan is like, I don't want to show you my screenplay. That's not for you. That's for me. A screenplay is not meant to be seen as a finished product. It's something that is only between me and my screenwriter and me. That too only for me to understand. So that's how he's looking at screenwriting. Everything is in the shooting. So that's a completely new way of thinking, right? For one industry, for the 4 or 5 new directors to think like that, because it's not about finishing 3 scenes in one day. It's like, let's shoot. Let's get to the scene as we shoot. And there's no problem, like, because the stars are not taking that kind of money. I mean, this is one of the reasons, right? If Fahad is giving you his dates to shoot Maheshwara Pradhigaram, he's not telling you, okay, you only have 30 days. I have my next movie shooting. It's like, okay, let's discover the movie in the middle and let's just see where it goes. So you can improvise, you can do those things that you can't do earlier. You don't have to really go to the sets with everything planned to the T. So I think the movies that I really love, like Premam, Maheshwara Pradhigaram, the Tondi Modalum, these are not movies that it's beyond your thinking, right? Because we've also seen so many movies. It's like, exactly why this scene is here, what the scene is going to lead to, what is the high point of the scene. It's very difficult to figure that out with these kind of movies because it's just, okay, it's a different logic. Let's just shoot and we'll discover the moment in the middle, So it's very strange. So I feel in a very abstract kind of sense, it's some of this. But then, of course, it could be anything because these guys, they literally grew up with world cinema. Okay, like the exposure they would have had is akin to what Adur would have had because he went to film school. He would have had access to all the reels, like literally the reels of all the great classics that he could have watched. So the idea of a movie is very different for these guys because there's a solid bunch of them who've all gone to FTI and SRFTI and all that. And even otherwise, these are all people who just the director of this movie called Tivandi. His name is T.P. Fellini. I mean, he's named Fellini because his dad is a film buff. So it's that generation who's making movies right now. And Don Palatra, for instance, he's a Tarkovsky like nut. Like that's the like he's got a movie where 18 minutes is just 2 cows.
Wow.
So that's the generation right now. It's like a crazy bunch of talents. So like even like it's like one great period where even the shitty movies are watchable. So
that's an important thing. I'm not personally a Tarkovsky fan. I feel like I can never sit through a Tarkovsky film in one sitting. But people who are influenced by world cinema exist in every industry, right? You sit with a Mishkin in Tamil. He will talk to you for probably thousands of hours about world cinema, right? You sit with any of the filmmakers there, they will tell you that. And similarly, I'm sure between Anurag Kashyap and Bansali and all of these guys, they'll also talk for hours about world cinema, right? But the exposure is never been, at least for these directors today, it's not a problem, right?
Yeah.
But, it always came down to, I want to make this kind of a film because that's what will sell, right? Like the economics was always a problem, right? So I have a question which is in 2 parts. So there's a film called Achundama, which is, and I've seen the film many number of times, right? It has Urvashi and Meera Jasmine in it. And I cannot see that kind of a film being made as a proper film with a proper release anywhere else in the country except in Kerala, right? Films like that will run. for whatever it is worth. And then again, you have a Maheshanda Pradikaram, and you have most of you have a Trance, which released when theaters were open. All of them ran, right? And the economics was never a problem, right? So my first part to the question is, why is it like that in Kerala? I'm probably asking a very dumb question in that. And second is, with the advent of the Netflix and Amazon, how has that economics sort of changed?
First question, I mean, I'll reply to a case like Achun Rama. It was a very modest release. It's not that the film got a major release or anything. There was a little bit of hype because it was Urvashi's return to Malayalam cinema after, I think, 12 or 13 years. There was a little bit of hype about that. And of course, the director, Satyanand Kat. It was a very tiny film. I remember it released in what is the equivalent of the smallest, like Devi Bala. In Devi Theatre, it released in Devi Bala. That is the screen it got in Cochin. But in that screen, it ran for 100 days.
Hang on, there is a Devi and a Devi Bala in Cochin also.
No. I'm saying the equal. Sangeeta, it released in Sangeeta. The second you say Devi Bala, Bala's the smallest, right? So it released in Sangeeta, and it ran for 100 days in Sangeeta.
Wow.
So that's how it was. And there's always that culture of families going to watch movies. I mean, that's there here also. But the difference being, you don't need a Pandiraj, you don't need a Shivakarthikeyan family movie to take people into theaters. It can happen with a Meera Jasmine movie. It was definitely there when Manju Warrier was a proper star. I mean, she's a big star even now, but she was a star even before she got married, right? So even at that time, there was an audience to watch her movies. So the fact that it's a woman-oriented movie or a female-led movie, that wasn't a problem, because families would come to watch movies invariably, especially when it's a Satyanand Kat movie. It's a different, he's got a different crowd. It's like a superstar movie, you're basically selling only one ticket because you're bringing a fan in, right? But Satyanand Kat is selling 4 tickets. So you just have to, every movie is selling 4 tickets. So that's his logic. So that crowd is always there. So that's there even in other states, right? Even in Tamil, there are so many directors who would have had that, that whole family film market, Vaanathu and all the kind of movies that have always been there. This is just that space. Only things, we have one person for that. Satyanand Kat has been dominating that for 30 years and he's made 60 films. So he's got that. Apart from that, when you come to Amazon and, I have to kind of answer the whole budget thing also, right? So I guess when I talk about the budget part of Malayalam cinema, producers were generally very, very different in Kerala compared to producers in Tamil Nadu. Okay, even if you go historically, even if you go into the 60s and 70s, the producers there were 2 huge studios called Maryland and then the Navodaya Udaya, those are 2 brothers, and then Maryland Studios. And these guys, they made family movies. They made movies that appealed to the middle class, mythologicals, historicals, religious movies, and all those kind of things. And even when they were in their powers, they would try to outdo each other. Of course, that competition led to a lot of great movies, but they would also buy a lot of novels. They should also buy the rights of a lot of great novels, a lot of novellas, and get those made into films. So that culture was always there. These producers weren't businessmen first. There were people, the really patrons of the art, the real patrons who would read novels, who wanted to just somehow associate themselves with a great author, a great literary work. And then they would get a director to make it, spend a lot of money making it. So that culture, the producers were the biggest superstars in the 70s and 80s. All the actors, Prem Nasir, Satyan, they were company artists. So when producers are from an artistic kind of background, and when the money is controlled by people who love art, it's very different, right? It's why would you do that? If a director like Mishkin, they have no access to kind of make exactly the film that he wants, the way he wants, because he might have to go through a channel that won't understand his movies. It's only now that he's established himself that people are chasing him. But it's a much more complicated route here to kind of get that money with you and then make the movie that you want. Whereas in Malayalam, there's always that culture of, going ahead and making our experimental movies, writers coming into movies and writers getting paid a lot of money to M.T. Vasudevan, Padmarajan, they're all writers, So that was always there. So budget for little experimental movies, even if it's very small, it's a very small budget. And it's most producers can handle one flop. It's not like a Tamil movie where the budget itself is so big that if you have one flop, you're like knocked out. So even risk wise, it's a little less, and there's generally a history of all kinds of movies working in Kerala. So fundamentally, that money becomes a little less complicated. And now coming to your second point about OTTs and Amazon and all those kind of things, the biggest reason for that is Malayalam cinema is still super, super nimble when it comes to productions. So even Aaratte, the movie that released a couple of years back, a couple of weeks back, like Mohanlal's big budget film, even that they managed to finish in some 50, 60 days. Even the big budget movies get finished under 50 days. Hridayam, they are apparently finished it 2 or 3 days before schedule. When does that even happen, right? They know how to kind of make movies with like restrictions anyway. This is when they're not trying to make a movie like Premam or Mahesh and the Pradigaram or whatever. I'm saying everybody knows how to kind of maximize their limited resources. So when you have a lockdown, and when you're saying no movies can release, no movies can be shot. It's like literally Fahad, Mahesh, Nazria, they're all living in one apartment building. Let's say this is make a movie. That's literally how simple it was in their heads. Just figure out a format. Let's just make a movie. We'll all stay in the clubhouse of that apartment building and figure out a movie. That's how simple it is. Whereas in Bombay, okay, let's discuss with Amazon. We have a script. Okay, let's have a writer's room. After the writer's room, let's discuss ideas. Let's make a PowerPoint presentation. It's a 2-year process. There is nothing called a quickie in Hindi cinema. So I guess that's the difference. You make it doesn't work, big deal. Father is going to say, I'll do one more movie for you for free or something like that. That's it. Whereas here, everything is a big deal. Everything is complicated. So that's the difference. Like when I was making my list of the best films in 2021, I got 17 Malayalam films. In Tamil, like all of us together couldn't manage 10. Because, of course, first of all, nothing released.
Right.
Second, obviously there weren't that many good movies. So that's kind of the difference, So everything coming together, basically.
Yeah, I think for me the sentence of most importance in the long answer you gave is the producers are the superstars of Malayalam cinema.
Was not anymore. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I it sort of resonates because at a institutional level, if you're able to change things, right, then everything else sort of falls into place. Yeah, and I'm just thinking a film like Joji would have just been, and it was released during the lockdown. It was made during the lockdown, and it's just stunning. Right? It's probably one of the better takes on Macbeth I've ever seen.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to also ask, and this is a conversation I was actually having with Manu Pillai when he was on the show, and for some strange reason we took on tangent and talking about Malayalam cinema while we were discussing his book, and then we were talking about the DNA. Basically, that episode was on brand Kerala. Why Kerala is so different from the rest of this country or this continent, right? And we were talking about how a lot of the sensibilities, that you see in Malayalam cinema today, is actually rooted in the DNA, of the state, right? And for me, and I was speaking to Sophia Paul in the previous episode, and we were asking her as to where it comes from, right? I would love to pick your brains on that, right? Like when it comes to, say, for example, things like how women are portrayed, right? Or how violence is portrayed, or how a society is portrayed. Everything seems to be progressive max, in a Malayalam film when you compare it with, Hindi, Tamil, or any of the mainstream films, right? What is your take on where does it come from?
See, all that is now. All that is very recent. Like, if I go back to the movies of the 2000s and all that, they're extremely sexist. Even you don't even have to go back that far. Like, if you go back maybe 7 or 8 years, and then when Dilip is making his 50 crore, 60 crore films, those are ridiculously sexist movies. For instance, he breaks up with one girl and he gets a dog, and then he names that dog after his ex There were movies like that, crazy movies like that. So all that, I mean, it's maybe the movies that are getting the movies that are traveling outside. Maybe it feels like it's all progressive and hunky dory and stuff like that. But the fundamental blockbuster was not even close to being progressive. So that I don't completely agree with. But then, I mean, if you go back from the 60s and 70s, the kind of people who got into the industry, it was generally, at some point, KPSC Nirjara passed away a couple of days back, right? So I was just reading up about KPSC and their history and stuff like that. So Kerala is a state where the democratically elected Communist Party came to power. Okay, and this is at a time when Congress is so powerful, and they've just won independence for the entire country. Even at that state, it's the theater, the drama troops that's traveling from different parts of the state. I mean, different parts of, like, every district. They're covering every district in Kerala, performing these plays. For instance, a play called "Ningal Enne Communist Aki," like "You Made Me a Communist," and they're performing this all over the state, and that's how these concepts really went into people. Like, people understood communism. Like, it's actually a very complicated topic to understand in the 50s and 60s, right? So all this is like explained through drama. It is explained through these great writers like Topil Basi and people like that. And that's how it's kind of moved into cinema. Like, cinema, even right from the start of Malayalam cinema, it wasn't merely entertainment. There was a lot of there's a lot of Neela Koil, for instance, is about an upper caste man who marries a Dalit woman. Like, a movie that came out, I think, 1959 or 60, like the first Malayalam movie to be shot partly outside and stuff like that. So that history, that culture was always there. It was always progressive. But come back to a stage where it's progressive again is only very recent. Because the entire 2000s, you look at all those superstar movies, it is extremely casteist, extremely sexist. So it comes and goes. Like, when the movies are good, the politics seem to be good. When the movies are bad, the politics in it seem to be problematic. So I guess it's a mixed bag, which is like that in every industry. It's not like it's going to be very different. But right now, it seems such that, okay, the gender politics part is very strong in Malayalam cinema. It's an industry where there are about 2 or 3 female superstars. All that is there in Malayalam cinema right now. But that wasn't the case even in 2005, 2006, for sure.
Right. It's also, as we read about what's happening with Amma and Dilip and everything else, is there also like a tension, like what the industry wants to be, or rather what the society wants to be, and how the industry for years has been structured, which is not necessarily, like you rightly said, not representative, so not as progressive as ever. Is there a tension between multiple forces at play inside the industry behind the screens?
Yeah, because it is unbelievable. Like, Kerala, in that way, if you look at it, I was just thinking about this a couple of weeks back, because when you look at most of the states, like, the duality of a state is, okay, one set of people are educated and progressive. I mean, I don't mean educated in the, okay, they went to school. I'm saying, like, okay, they know how to improve themselves and think about other people. I'm saying, you think one set of a society is people who think like that, and the other set are the people who think slightly backwards, who think in caste and gender, and the two sections of society, right? Especially driven by religion. You find that dichotomy in most states and most cultures. In Kerala, because it's either like Congress party or a Communist party coming into thing, especially that whole caste religion thing is not as active or alive as it is in other states. Of course, religion is very important in the politics, and a lot of the parties are very, like, Muslim League is a big party, and the Central Kerala Congress is also one big party, and they keep changing the pattern, the state, every other election time. But that's just one aspect of it. So the way, how from outside, when you observe Tamil Nadu or when you observe Andhra or Karnataka, the way you're able to see it, it's much clearer there. But the only time all of us kind of woke up to seeing, okay, there is another side of Kerala society that lives like this, is this Dilip case. More, it's bigger than one actor attacking another actor, or more than one particular situation snowballing into a media trial or anything like that. It's like, okay, there are two Kerala's. There is a Kerala that thinks about, like, people a certain way. There's another Kerala who thinks that, okay, like, like, he's right and you should be with him, forgive him, it's okay, he's been in jail for 80 days. And so it's a huge everybody, like, it's like when you see a person, right? There's a joke in America in the 90s and all that you kind of talk to somebody, they're either pro-choice or pro-life, right?
Yeah.
In Kerala, it's are you pro-Dilip or anti-Dilip? It's everybody has picked their side. So it's
Is
like
Pro Dilip actually big enough?
you will not believe it. I think it's because our social media
Yeah,
algorithm in such a way
we all
that
live in a bubble, right? Yeah.
yeah, we live in a bubble where we think that's the truth. But in Kerala, it's completely different.
Wow.
Like there's so many people who think, do you still? I can't believe Dilip would have done it. Are you crazy? How can you think that Dilip did it? He's such a nice guy. Haven't you seen him in his movies? The number of crores of people think that. I mean, he could have. I mean, of course, it's a court case and all that, but it's literally not as easy as we think it is. Outside Kerala, you think the sources that reach us is what's telling us that, right? But in Kerala, it's completely different, and it's not like Vanida, like the biggest women's magazine in Kerala. They are not idiots to put Dilip on the cover. They would have thought about it, and they're kind of aligning with a particular view, right? So it's huge. Like it's bigger than a CM. It's bigger than a superstar becoming a CM in terms of how a film-related event is kind of snowballed into this huge state-splitting thing. You know.
That is crazy. The other question, of course, one has to ask is, nepotism works in Malayalam cinema, right? I mean, I'm qualifying what I'm saying, right? But listen, if Fafa is nepotism, just give me a lot of that, right? I'm a huge fan of Fasil Senior and his cinema, right? And I don't necessarily think. Actually, I don't know if he benefited from that. I don't know how big Fasil is in Malayalam. But, with Dulquer and Fahad, there is this thing, really. People like me who are always looking down upon nepotism and what the implications of that on a struggling actor or struggling creator is. I'm just looking at Malayalam cinema. I'm saying, well, this shit works. What is your take on this?
Both interesting examples. If you're taken Pranav, my answer would have been different. I'm not judging his talent or anything like that, but that's a different case. But then, since you took Dulquer and Fahad, Fahad is my example for like it's the example that I take when people talk about nepotism as a privilege. Okay, like let's say I am an actor. Let's say I am an actor. I mean, I want to be an actor. I come from nowhere. My family is completely against movies. I struggle for 10 years. And then I finally make my movie, and then I become a star by like how Tovino became a star from the outside. Okay, you're not from a crazy rich background. You struggle, you go for auditions, you get rejected, you toughen up, you become a hard worker, and you become a star by the time you're 30. You take a look at Fahad. He made his first movie when he was in 12th standard. Okay, he made a movie called his father, the biggest director in Malayalam at that time, who introduced Mohanlal, is making a movie with you when you're 17 or 18, which means you literally don't have any say. Your father's your super boss. He's asking you to act in this movie. You have no choice. You go act in that movie. It is the biggest flop of the year. It is the biggest disaster. You become a joke. You become a complete joke in a complete state. And you're supposed to be the next Kunjako Boban and all that, and people are howling at you, whistling and insulting you completely, and you have to shift to the US because you want to forget this. So this is what, like, so at least when you're not a nepo kid, right? Like you can start at zero, but with Fahad, you're starting at -100. So do you mean to say that it's like tougher for Tovino than it was tougher for Fahad? Of course, his father's a huge ass director. Mammootty was a cameo appearance in his first movie. He had a movie that released in probably 30 or 40 screens back in early 2000. But when it failed, what it would have done to him is not like how it would have failed for Tovino. Tovino fails, his 3 films flop or whatever, he's heartbroken, he's ruined his name among a few relatives, and then you go back to your IT job. But this is suicidal levels of embarrassment, right? Like you're the joke of an entire state. And that's what he kind of overcame to, nepotism is like he screwed him, It's not like it helped him in any way, So that's the Fahad. it's all case by case. Nobody had it easy or anything like that. Even Prithviraj, he's a superstar's son. Of course, he got the opportunity because people can see him. Right? Okay, there is like Sukumaran's son is very handsome. Sukumaran's son is very mature. That's why people, he was supposed to act in the movie Fahad Actin, actually. That's the trivia.
Okay.
Yeah. So, of course, it's because of that access that
He
they
dodged that
got
bullet.
it. Yeah. But then eventually, what do you call it? Like he's also 18 years old. Like it's not like he had any power. That movie worked, and then he became who he did. Eventually, Fahad and Prithviraj are around the same place, right? But Dulquer's situation is very different. Actually, I feel Dulquer's strategy is the smartest because, of course, he loves his father. He's a huge Mammootty fan. But if you see the movies that he acted in, right, everything that you were going to say about Dulquer himself is saying in that movie. Everything that you're ready, like as a society, all the abuses and all the judgmental things that you've loaded and kept for Mammootty's son, he's addressing in his movies. So like if you take a movie like Ustad Hotel, which is basically his big hit at the start.
Yeah.
You think he's privileged, right? In the movie, he's privileged. He's coming from a really rich family, but he's coming from a really rich family, and whatever, he has to come to Kerala, and he's making fun of himself not knowing anything about Kerala. So in Ustad Hotel, it's about this guy, this really rich, privileged guy who's coming from Dubai, who's coming to Calicut, a small place in Calicut. And about 15 to 20 minutes about that movie is how clueless he is about Kerala, how he has no faculties to kind of survive in a place like Kerala, and how people think he's going for a Pendagana, like he's going to see Nitya Menon, and he has no idea that's happening, how to talk to her, and he acted in 3 or 4 movies like that. He acted in another movie called ABCD, where he's an American NRI. He's an American NRI who comes to Kerala, and his dad is telling him, you're super rich. I mean, like, we have so much money, but then you have to live in Kochi with, I think, 3,000 rupees a month. I don't remember how much. Like a very small budget film. So exactly what we are thinking, like, how will you know? What do you know about life? What do you know about acting? You're such a rich guy's son. The film is addressing that. And if you see all the first set of movies that they acted, Neelagasham Pachakadal, Ustad Hotel, ABCD, his enemy is his father. So constantly, if you act in a way that, even subconsciously in every movie, Dulquer, Bangalore Days, in every movie, you're seeing this new actor, and in every movie, his primary emotion is his hatred for his father. You're distancing this guy from Mammootty, right? Subconsciously. Like he doesn't have anything to do with his father, And then after a stage, when you start doing all these Kurup kind of things, it's okay to bring it back. It's not like Ram Charan. In his first movie itself, his father's coming and dancing next to him, Yeah, Mohanlal's like the Pranav Mohanlal, the first time he comes on screen, he's singing a song from Mohanlal's first movie. His second movie is called Irvatiyonnam Nootandu, which is technically like a sequelish sounding title to Mohanlal's Irvatiyonnam Nootandu. So at one stage, you're trying to make one guy appear like his father's son, and he's the prince to the king and all that. Whereas Dulquer, he was so fast. Like the speed with which he made his own identity is ridiculous. How quickly by the third year, he forgot that he's Mammootty's son. So that is like ingenious level thinking. So two very different strategies. One is like life screwed up paths, initial first 5-6 years. Whereas Dulquer, it is like the smartest strategy you could have thought of, which no other star has still taken.
Absolutely. When you break it down like this, it makes a lot more sense than it did earlier. Vishal, I want to ask about the geometric opposite of what we're talking about, right? It's just, we spoke about how, women are portrayed in Malayalam cinema, how progressive it is, and you told us how it has always not been the case, etc. But in spite of all of that, in the last 10 years, if we really look at it, when it comes to the people at a really powerful place in Malayalam cinema, right, at a director's level or at a producer's level, Sophia Paul or Anjali Menon still seem to be like the exception, right? Like for an industry like Malayalam, is the glass ceiling still very thick?
Yeah, because it's all like, we have examples like you spoke about Sophia Paul. There's also another producer. I'm right now not getting her name, but she's one half of Friday Film House, that kind of produced Angamali Diaries and all that. Now she's kind of split with Vijay Babu, but then they just like a man woman duo that used to be a producer there, and of course Sophia Paul, and then once in a while a producer here and there. So in terms of producers, it's like literally only Sophia Paul. You can't really say anybody who makes like Murli, who's like like a female producer or anything of that sort. Even among directors, there's nobody who makes like those next level mainstream movies like Anjali Menon does, like a movie that really gets three superstars together and stuff like that. The difference is not that always there have been female women directors making artsy festival movies, like really soulful movies that release in about 20-30 screens. That's always been there in every industry. In Tamil also there are so many.
Correct.
But the difference is the difference is they come and they make those 50 crore movies, right? That's when it's a movement there. It's like a thing has been normalized in that case only when a mainstream effect, you get to see a mainstream effect. Even that is just 2-3 people. So compared to other industries, it might seem like, okay, wow, they've got this figured, but it's just really like one person in each field. Like, are there many female superstars? Okay, Malayalam has Manju Warrier and Malayalam has Parvati. And then there is another set of Aishwarya Lakshmi, all of them who are getting solo heroine movies right now. But it's nowhere in the league like, okay, Manju Warrier and Mohanlal, if you compare them to be the same, it's not even close, right? It's like a huge difference. The opening Mohanlal gets and the opening Manju Warrier gets. So it's not at that stage yet. Yeah, but it's at least there. So, for instance, even if you talk about WCC, leave the fact that have everything they kind of has everything, like, has it led to an industry-wide change? Maybe not yet. It might lead to that, but the fact that this is the only industry where there is even a thing called WCC. You get it, however small, or however new. The fact that there is a need for a thing called WCC and there is a thing called WCC in Malayalam cinema is a big deal, right? So in that sense, all those things are there in place, but it's not some utopia or anything like that. It's still.
It's not. In fact, I think it's the opposite. To me, it really beats me because in Tamil, of course, similar situation. There's only Sudha Kongura. Then again, you have to struggle for a second name, right?
Yeah.
But in Hindi, if you see, for an industry like that, you have a Zoya, you have a Farah Khan, and you probably have a couple of more people who are doing mainstream cinema. But I would expect that for the kind of state, the kind of industry Malayalam is, right, there will be more people at the decision-making level as far as cinema is concerned, right? But to me, I always found it very stark that it doesn't, unfortunately, have, right?
Yeah.
Vishal, moving on from this, we have to end this with your take on. I know there is a. I like I said at the beginning of the show, I love your lists at the end of the year. But we got to probably take the last 5 years. Which are your top 5 films which you feel are important films as far as Malayalam is concerned?
I'll tell you important different reasons. Okay, like
yes.
These are not like my top 5 films in any way, but then I'm just like generally telling you. For instance, there's a movie that released yesterday on Sun Next called Janeman. Okay, it's a movie where the actors are like very, very small actors, like Arjun Ashokan. Basil Joseph is the actual main actor in the movie, the director of Minal Murli. Yeah. So he's the main face even on the posters and things like that. So that's a movie that came out maybe 100 days ago, so maybe 3 months back, and it's a movie nobody expected anything from. I had a preview show on Tuesday. The movie released on Friday, and I loved the movie on Tuesday. And it's a movie that released with 3 other bigger films a week after Kurup. So it's like a film that was getting no screens at all. And eventually it became a hit exactly the way a movie became a hit in the 80s and 70s and 80s. Like 100 people talking about the movie, those 100 people going and telling another 500 people, those 500 people telling another 1,000, like nothing. Like there is no star power, there is no marketing budget, there is no wide release, nothing. And it ran for 100 days during COVID. It withstood Kurup, it withstood Marekyar, it withstood Arat, everything. I mean, not Arat, every movie that released in January. and it's a success story like that you won't believe during COVID. And it's like people are coming to the theater because they want to laugh, and they just want to laugh louder than the person sitting next to them. That's the only reason. So Johnnyman is a great example of a movie that actually didn't change anything. It just took us back 30 years and said theater is theater, you know. So that's a movie like that. Then there's another wonderful movie called Tingalacha Nishyam that's playing on Sony Live, which is the most Mahesh Pradhikaram-esque movie that's released after Mahesh.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a movie that I completely love, and it's even though like we've all Kerala, such a small state, Kasargod, right, the northernmost district of Kerala, altogether there's been some 3 or 4 movies set in Kasargod. So there's been movies where Mammootty is from Kasargod, but then but the story happens in Cochin. Same way, there have been stories where Tondi Modalam, right? There are people from central Kerala who go to Kasargod for work, and the movie happens there. But there's never been a movie where the movie is set in Kasargod and they're talking in Kasargod dialect. Wow. This is a movie like that, and it's like you won't believe the joy that I got, because I'm hearing the dialogue and I'm just pressing back 10 seconds and this is hearing the dialogue again. I've never heard Malayalis talk like that. It's like music. Like I watched that movie like I was listening to an album, you know. So it is a movie like that came out again last year. Then of course Joji, Minnal Murli. Like I'll tell you, like as somebody who's equally in love with Tamil cinema as well as Malayalam cinema, you generally look at Malayalam cinema and okay, these guys can only make serious movies. These guys can only make like all these super classy, like wow, like woke films and stuff like that, right? And our masala is borrowed. You take a movie like Lucifer, it's like, I mean, it's getting remade in Telugu, it's getting remade in other languages, but even when you're saying Ayappanam Koshiyam, it's getting remade in Telugu. It's a mass movie. Like it's a mass movie with nothing shockingly original about the massiness or the masala-ness. Right? Of course, it's a great, very well made, and there's a little like authentic like artistry in it and all that. But eventually, it's a mass movie which feels little borrowed from other states. For instance, there is no Bhasha formula in Malayalam. It's not like Malayalam cinema has invented its own kind of masala film. It's all the small, tiny movies that are getting remade in all the other states, right? But when it comes to Minnal Murli, it's like, dude, we figured that out also.
Yeah.
Like everybody's tried making superhero movies. You guys haven't cracked it. We cracked it. And it's the opposite way of thinking. It's not, dude, we're not going to compete with Hollywood. We are going to use CGI and budgets to do the smallest things, like things that you can't even imagine that small. And that's how they figured it out, right? So it's a matter of great like pride that, okay, there is a, like the next generation, like people are like kids are like 4 or 5, their school bags are going to be like a Minnal Murli school bag. It doesn't have to be Marvel and stuff like that, right? So
I was in a party where a couple of them were already wearing Minnal
Murli t-shirts, yeah.
You know, what I love, I mean, we have to go back to the list, but what I loved about Minnal Murli is while it is also original, it also pays homage to some tropes of superhero film, like the way Guru Somasundaram's character eventually. What a! I mean, I thought Taroj is written like out of the world, sort of a thing, the villain in the film. It also borrows some elements from that, but it makes it so local that it is absolutely so
and it's so simple, right? And it's so simple. Like the hero gets the hero. It's basically like how I see that movies. It's like it's Michael Mann and Kamaraj, right? Like at birth, the 4 kids were split at birth. In this, it's like the same supernatural event. 2 people, different upbringings, different results. So it's like that. It's such a simple way of using a superhero concept to make a solid masala movie. So that's of course there. Then Drishyam 2, I had no expectations from Drishyam 2. I thought it was a scam of a movie. Oh, they've got to shoot it in the middle of COVID. How will they have a script? And I had like so many discussions about what it's going to be, right? Because we know the first part and we know the ending. This could be it, that could be it. But in 1 second, the movie starts and you start with another guy seeing Mohanlal get out of the police station. You're like, shit, oh damn, I never thought of that movie. I never thought of that. Yeah. So it's like that. So I don't want to just stick to like the real crazy artsy movies or anything like that. But because even like Drishyam is the opposite of that. It's mainstream masala, but a crazy whodunit with crazy twists. So even that really worked for me. So I'm only able to remember movies from last year because I mean the list is still so fresh. Right? Kala, can you imagine a movie like Kala? It's art cinema. It's art cinema. It's like it's a zone where without the glamour or the glitz or without Tobino acting in it, it's such a proper experimental movie, right? Okay, you start at this stage, you start with this arc where you are looking at the outside and thinking, dude, don't trust that guy. He's damn shady. We should close our curtains. Who are these outsiders? And in the end of the movie, you are this person, and you're looking at the fairer, handsome, Jesus-looking guy, and thinking he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
So what a fascinating kind of a movie. Like, how do you even explain it?
Yeah.
And to convince people to get that made. Of course, it didn't work at all in the theaters, but like every movie deserves Sunny. Like it's such a small movie, right? Such a small movie. Everybody would have thought of an idea like that. One guy stuck in a hotel room and the kind of thoughts that he has to deal with, and eventually that too is a very cathartic kind of a movie. So like too many exciting, interesting movies.
But if I may stretch my luck and ask you, film of the last decade, but I'll start by telling you mine. As far as Malayalam is concerned, for me, I don't think there was a better film than Tondi Mudalam that was made. For like 10,000 reasons. But what about you? If you had to pick one film in the last decade, what would you pick?
Last decade was in 2010s.
2010s, yeah.
For me, Mahesh and Pratikaram, like no doubt. Yeah, because it's somewhere completely Malayalam movie, but completely new kind of Malayalam movie. It's like it's all the kind of movies and people you've seen in movies before, but you've never seen them like this. So so it's a movie that I probably would have rewatched most number of times also. So that's my favorite of the last decade. Imayao, I love Imayao. Of the Lijo films. Amen. Amen was such a beautiful movie when I watched it. Like
the aesthetics of Amen.
That's what like people are boasting and people are talking about Gangubai. Like if you think Gangubai is a great white movie, then watch Amen. Amen does even more beautiful things with white. Things like that. So I mean, I can't. There's too many movies coming to my head right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Imayao is like, for me, I could smell the coast. Literally smell the coast when I was watching the film.
Then I'll tell you, if you like that movie, you should watch this movie called Shavam. Shavam as in corpse. Yeah.
Of course.
I think it's there on Mubi. I don't know if it's still there. It was there. It's by this director called Don Palatara, and it's a 15 lakh or 20 lakh rupee movie.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah. And you see it, it's to me, in terms of the writing, it's better than Imayao. Maybe not in terms of making, because he's a different kind of a maker. He's a very still filmmaker. He's not fluid like Lijo, but that movie is something else. The kind of hypocrisies about it. That's also there's a dead body and the kind of conversations that happen around it. But it's super fascinating movie. Very small, I think 70-80 minute movie or something. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. I look forward to that. Yeah. Vishal, thank you so much. Always a pleasure listening to you talk about cinema, and look forward to listening to more of that.
Thanks so much, Karthik. I hope I didn't just bombard, just speak completely. Like I just went a little too much, I think. So I hope I still made sense.
We were counting on that. Yeah. All right. Thanks, man. Speak to you very soon, hopefully.
Thanks so much, Karthik. Thanks. Yeah.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And filter_coffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
We know you love fast food,
Fast fashion,
faster payment.
lightning fast internet speed.
Then why not fast information?
On Think Fast, where we discuss the latest developments in the world of technology, business, marketing, pop culture.
With a side of sarcasm and my dad jokes, not just mine.
Not mine, Varun. My jokes are funny. So join me, guys, the funnier one, Suchita Salvan, co-founder of LBB.
And me, Varun Girala, the co-founder of The Glitch, as we think fast only on the IVM network.
Fresh episodes out every Monday.
On the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Remember the days when our granny used to narrate once upon a time stories? Let's bring back the good old days of moral stories with Storytime Tamil. Hi, I am Ravishankar Balachandran, host of Storytime Tamil podcast. I would like you to entertain and educate your children with stories from Storytime Tamil. Tune in to the new episode sharp at 7 p.m. every day on IVM website, IVM podcast app, YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast from.